Okay, great. Thanks, Brent. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about raspberry production and varieties and what our experience has been up here in New York. If you take a look at those tunnels, we have those on our campus, and point you to the sky there. That's a fairly typical skyline for New York. It's gray. We get a lot of clouds. It's one of the cloudier places in the country. I think that's probably one of the big differences between here and a lot of the Western production places. Let's see here. So I thought last week Brent gave a very nice talk at the Raspberry and Blackberry conference and explained the various production regions in Utah. I thought I'd give you a little overview of what we are dealing with here. So latitude, we're a little bit farther north at 42.8. Elevation is a big difference, of course. We're only at 610 feet rather than several thousand feet. And the big weather changing feature in this area is Lake Ontario. We're only about 29 miles south of Lake Ontario, and that really does moderate our temperature, both in the summer and the winter. So our 90% frost-free date starts in around May 10th, and then we start to see frost in late October. So about 172 days outdoors without frost, and we can of course extend that with tunnels, which is what we recommend for growers, mainly because of rain. So the winters here are fairly mild, very gray, very long, but usually not overly cold, but quite a bit of snow cover, usually wet snow. We get a lot of rain through the spring and into the summer as well. And of course, for raspberries, that's really not a good thing. So we do recommend high tunnels for production, although it is slow to adapt in this region, because for the most part, our growers are small raspberry growers. They grow a lot of things, a lot of diversified farmers, and raspberries are only a minor part of most people's operation. And so they don't invest necessarily in the best technology for that and save their investments for some of their larger crops. So, of course, about Brent certainly done a lot of work on high tunnel production and shown you the advantages to that in fruit size, vigor of the plants, lower root rots, fruit rots, things like that. We've had really big problems with spotted wing Drosophila in this region. I'm sure that you are familiar with this little insect. But the high tunnels are nice. They can be combined with netting, and that has worked in smaller situations and really improves fruit quality without spraying. There can be some challenge. We see excess vigor in some of the varieties, like Caroline, for instance, really overgrows. A lot of the blackberries are so incredibly vigorous, they're a little challenging in some of the tunnels. We see powdery mildew problems. It may not be as much of an issue in a drier climate. And we see late leaf rust and fruit rust late in the season. Of course, the management and mites. Mites can be a real problem for us on raspberries. They don't really care for the blackberries much, but they really can hit the raspberries pretty hard sometimes. And spraying is just about something most people don't want to do in the tunnels. It's really difficult. And even though it is cloudy here and we don't get as much sun, Brent mentioned that you have sunburn issues sometimes in the summer there. We have sunburn issues here as well. So late summer, July, August, it even can be bad enough here. So some of these raspberries are a little more sensitive to that than others. So of course, here's what the high tunnels look like when they're in good shape, great vigor, great crop load. This would be a really ideal looking type of situation. But this is often what we see in cases. You see over in the left there, the double fruit. We see that midsummer when the temperatures are really high and the flowers are developing. Some of the varieties are very susceptible to this disorder, and that fruit, of course, is not marketable. The sunburn, the white druplet, that's fairly common. We see it here. It's exacerbated by high humidity. We don't have really high irradiation levels, but we do have high humidity, and that comes along with powdery mildew, as you see there in the bottom left. They're not a big problem in raspberry varieties. There's only a few varieties that have shown much susceptibility to powdery mildew, and if you avoid those, then you don't have too much trouble. So varieties like for us, Canby is a problem, Nantahala can be a problem, and the black raspberries, especially the Primocane type, Niwot are really problematic for powdery mildew because it comes later in the summer, usually after most of the black raspberries are done for the summer crop. So this is a typical fruiting year. If you wanted to fruit raspberries for our entire season, we start early in the season with a variety prelude that might start in mid-June, and then that'll go all the way through Crimson Giant. That'll finish in November every year. So we can have a very long season. Of course, if you don't have high tunnels, that pushes the start date to towards the end of June and really cuts off the field season at the end of October, sometimes mid-October. Because of frost and rain. We get a lot of fall rain as well, and so that late season crop is not a good quality crop. And you can see it fairly typical varieties, Nova, Encore, the black raspberries are all in a short period in July, and into the fall crop with Polka and Joan Jay and Caroline and some of these other varieties that have been around for a while. So some of the standard varieties in our region, Prelude, Nova, Encore, are pretty much standard reds. We'll still see Boyne and Killarney around much, but they're really, the quality's not there. The black raspberries, there's really 3 varieties, Bristol, Jewel, and Mac, pretty round out the whole season, and that season's only maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks long. In the fall, we see a lot of Polka and Himbo Top, Joan Jay. Caroline is very popular for the field because of its very good vigor and nice eating quality, but in the tunnels, it can really be overgrown, and Heritage still grown quite a bit. And I'm not going to really talk much more about those varieties. They're pretty common, and Brent has, I'm sure, talked about these in the past. So I'm going to cover a little bit some of these newer varieties that have hit the market and what I know about them. Some of them I don't know much because they really are hard to get, and we haven't had much experience with them. So some of the newer varieties, Eden is a variety out of Nova Scotia, and Niwot I mentioned is marketed as a primocane fruiting black raspberry, and we'll get into that. And then on the primocane side, and this is what we're seeing, is most of the development has been on the primocane side because that's where the commercial market has gone. Imara, Kweli, and Kwanzaa out of the Netherlands, they've been around actually for quite some time. I first saw Imara nearly 10 years ago in 2012 in a European production site. So they've been around for a while, but they're really quite new to the US market. And then my varieties, newer varieties, Crimson Night, Crimson Treasure, and Double Gold. And I'll show you these and talk about them a little bit. So first with Eden, I don't know a whole lot about it. We have it in our trial and it will fruit this year. The vigor has been not exciting for me so far. It might just be our site. It might be a little wet, but it's marketed as a mid-season Floricane. I'm not excited about the color. It is kind of a dull color, and that we see in a lot of the Floricane germplasm. So that's a color I'd like to avoid, and that's what we're breeding away from, that color. It is reported to have very good flavor, and it's got Nova Scotia hardiness, so it should be relatively hardy for a red raspberry. I wanted to talk a little about Niwot. It got pushed pretty heavily as a primocane variety, but it really only produces maybe 10 to 20% of its crop in the fall, really just on the tips of the plant. And in our situation in the tunnels, it's extremely susceptible to powdery mildew. So a lot of the fruit is not marketable. We see a lot of double fruit as well. And so the fruit size is only medium. And then if you get double fruit and powdery mildew, you don't get a lot of fall crop. That's really good for marketing. It's a nice first step for outdoor production, maybe for primocane, to have a little bit of black raspberries in the fall. I think the black raspberry industry will move this way if we can ever get into the fresh market so that we can have a longer season. But for the summer crop, it's very nice. It's very similar to Bristol as far as fruit quality. Similar season. It's not especially large. It does have very good vigor and comes through our winters fairly well. But of course, you have to prune the tops off where it did flower and fruit. So here you can see a picture. Typically, you see fruit on the tips of the canes. You don't see it down here in the body of the plant. And so this part, if you cut off, you still have a good 6 feet of cane left for the spring crop. But you're really not getting a really heavy crop load. very nice quality fruit. This is summer fruit though, so you won't see any powdery mildew on it. But it's good eating quality, tastes very good black raspberry flavor, very typical. So it's just what's out there at this point. And hopefully we'll make some progress in the future. We are working on this, trying to expand the or strengthen that primary cane fruiting, get better crop loads on some of these types. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the advanced berry breeding cultivars. So this is a company in the Netherlands. This is Kweli, Kwanzaa, Imara, and then there's a new one out as well that Norse has available. So these are primarily targeted for substrate culture. If you know anything about the Netherlands production systems, they do a lot of greenhouse production of all sorts of berries. And so in our climates and our soils, we don't know a lot about their root rot tolerance and or their cold tolerance, because that is really not what they were designed for. They were developed also for that wholesale market. Their intended market is the supermarket. And in the United States, they are marketed exclusively by Norse Farms. So they're somewhat pricey to get. The royalty alone, if you buy less than 5,000 plants, is $1 per plant. And if you buy more than 5,000 plants, it's an annual fee that is based on a linear row foot of production. And I don't know what the fee is, but so this is a variety that's very closely guarded IP or intellectual property. When you plant it, you sign a production agreement, and you're expected to pay those royalties to go with it. But they have some advantages in quality, fruit quality, and so maybe it's worth trying some of these. You have to contact Norse Farms directly to get these plants. This is from a study Eric Hansen did in substrate in the high tunnels in Michigan, and I think it's did a very good job of showing the difference between the varieties and the potential of some of these varieties. And so here you can see the color differences across a bunch of different varieties. So this is Kwanzaa. That's that target color for the supermarket, that bright red that doesn't darken. And pretty much the rest of them are a little darker than most people would want for the supermarket. So here's Kweli. It's borderline. Imara gets a little darker and will darken in storage. And some of the others here, Crimson Night is one of mine. It's supposed to be dark. That's kind of its whole point. Vintage is one out of Oregon. I think Brent has probably seen that one. And some of these other varieties, here's Josephine, can be very dark and pretty late. So if you haven't seen this article by Eric Hansen, I would urge you to look at it. It's got some very good information across these different varieties for that substrate production on high tunnels. So here's Imara. It's marketed as a mid-season primary cane, about 10 days post polka, to give you an idea of harvest season. The fruit's kind of a round fruit. Tends to be on the darker red side. I think this picture is a little overexposed. It gives it a little brighter color, but I think it's a little darker than that. Similar in color to what polka is, and that's a somewhat darker berry. The flavor is good, but not as good as polka. Polka is a very good flavored berry in most people's opinion, so that gives you some idea. It is advertised as having very high lateral production, meaning two things: both a lot of branches on the laterals, but it also produces laterals well down the cane towards the base, and so it can get really high yields that way. But thinning of laterals is actually recommended because maybe it carries too much crop load, and you need to thin them a little bit in order to get the fruit size that you want. Here's Kweli, another round berry, also a little on the dark side. It's marketed as a few days past polka. In Eric's trial in Michigan, actually they had them switched, where Imara was a little faster or a little sooner ripening than Kweli, but they're very similar in season, in fact. So that's a round berry, good flavor, darker red. This one, they talk about very high cane production. So in the ground, you may have to thin some of the canes to reduce that cane density, so that in the high tunnel, you don't have overgrowth and make them difficult to harvest. It is known to be yellow rust susceptible. That may not be as much of a problem in your drier climate, but we do certainly see it here in New York. Even in the high tunnel, sometimes it'll blow in, and we can see it on susceptible varieties. And then Kwanzaa. This is the third one. Generally considered a late season variety for primocane fruiting, 3 weeks past polka. Maybe too late for your seasons, or you may have to accelerate it using some of the techniques Brent was talking about last week. Recommend it for substrate production. That's right there in their website. But it is the largest of the three, the most conic shaped with a brighter, lighter color. It is firm. They talk about a bit of a tender skin when it's harvested. It does have good shelf life because it doesn't darken and it doesn't leak. But you do have to harvest it carefully to not bruise it too much. So it's marketed as a light orange to red color and non-darkening. And that's that bright orange you see often in supermarkets that looks good under those fluorescent lights that we have. And this is the fourth one that Norse is carrying. And I don't know anything about it other than what I could find on the website. I have never seen it. This is Mapema, and I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it. It is primocane. There's not much known about it. It's advertised as a deep red color. So this is what we're seeing, is that we're seeing some of these new varieties hit the marketplace with almost no background information on them. And you're stuck just trying it on your own because we can't really give you much advice on it. But I wanted to let you know it is out there. It's from that same program, and it might be something to get a few plants and see how they do in your location, but I can't tell you much about it. Then we'll move into some of my varieties. So this is my latest variety, Crimson Treasure. So this was developed in New York in the soil and has large conic fruit, as you can see here. Good flavor, good shelf life. It darkens a little bit, but doesn't go purple. It just gets a little darker red. For us, it's very good yields in this 11 to 13,000 pounds per acre. This is in high tunnels. And what we see with it is very long harvest season. It branches a lot at the top of the plant. And so we get a lot of fruiting laterals at the top, really displaying the fruit at the top of the plant. And so it ripens for a very long time, starting in late August for us, and will go into late October, sometimes November. So we can have a really long season. The canes are fairly short and really stout, and so they do stand up fairly well. When it's fully loaded, of course, it will weep a little just from fruit weight, which is fairly typical. So they do still need to be trellised. We haven't seen any powdery mildew issues on it, and then it holds up very well to fight off the root rot as well. So we're hopeful that this one will find a way or find a place in our standard varieties for the future. Here you can see the plant itself. And I wanted to point out, so we have ripe fruit here in the middle. You have green fruit over here on the right and down low here as well. And then up here at the top, you still have flowers opening. And so these, of course, flowered 30 days or more ago, and these won't ripen. This one's not even open yet for another 30 days. So we're looking at a 60-day period from the first bloom to the end of ripening. And so that's a really long, and you can see how they're all displayed kind of out in the open. Makes picking easier because you can find the fruit. Not an overly aggressive plant. It has good vigor, but it's not an 8-foot plant with the huge canes. Then just a bit about a couple of specialty varieties that I've had on the market for a few years. They came through the program and we weren't really looking for them per se, but when you see something and you taste it and you're like, well, maybe we could find a place for this. And so this is Double Gold. It's a peach colored variety. You can see this conic fruit shape. I put this here because it's really interesting when you pick these and freeze them, they're pink. And they're really quite attractive frozen. It is a fairly soft berry. The flavor is really stupendous. And people are always really surprised because they don't know what to expect from a variety of this color. And so it's really a specialty variety. It's more of an accent type of thing. We wouldn't expect anybody to have a whole field full of this, but it really makes people interested in raspberries and brings them in to try them and to see what they look like. It is a tall, kind of upright plant. So the top of it is fairly late harvest primocane, so you can clip that and have a double crop and have a spring crop with that as well. And we found it to be tolerant to phytophthora root rot as well. So we don't see a lot of problems. It's a nice, vigorous plant. Here it does better justice to the color. It really is a very attractive peachy pink kind of color in a container. It's very distinctive. You can see it's a really nice, well-formed berry. Just tends to be on the soft side, so it wouldn't have a very good shelf life, but really an excellent eating fruit. And this is our other variety, Crimson Night. As you can see, very dark. And it was selected for that dark color. The flavor is very, very sweet, low acid. When it freezes, it's a really dark colored berry, and so it freezes really nice. And the eating quality coming out of the frozen is really outstanding. It really tastes good. Makes a really dark red jam. Is resistant to powdery mildew, but it does have some susceptibility to Phytophthora root rot. So raised beds would certainly be in order with this particular variety. It is fairly late season, but in the high tunnels, it will fruit for a fairly long time. And we generally finish our season with it and get most of the fruit off before any frost in our area. So here you can see it on the plant. The plant can branch quite well. Some of these primicanes where you get fruit up and down the cane with these branching laterals as well. And then I was thinking about what Brett was saying last week about all the trials he was doing, trying to advance the primicane fruiting to get some of these varieties to be able to have a full crop in your locations. And the reason for that is often the later season varieties have better yield, larger fruit, taller canes. And so you want to try to access some of those varieties. And there's been a lack of new Floricane varieties in recent years. There's not a whole lot of research or breeding being done. I do a little bit in Canada. The stuff in the Pacific Northwest has been primarily for processing. So there's not a lot of new Floricane varieties available. But there might be potential to grow some of these primicane varieties for the Floricane crop exclusively. When we were in Chile years ago at a conference, they were showing us some of the heritage that they were tipping when the plants were only 2 feet tall or so to delay those crops. Their season was really long and they wanted to spread the season out, and they grew heritage pretty extensively. And so they would tip part of their crop, and that would push those plants back another 2 weeks. And so that would extend their heritage season by 2 weeks. And heritage at that time was considered a late variety, but now there are much later varieties. Varieties like Kwanzaa, Crimson Giant, Josephine. These are later than heritage, and in many places, including here, we lose a lot of the crop because of frost, because it's not ripe in time. And so maybe we could push those so that they don't flower much at all and overwinter those canes and just take a Floricane crop. And generally, we see that the primicane varieties are fairly early because the fruit or the flowers have already developed when they go dormant. They're already initiated, and so in the spring they're on the early side when it comes to production. So if we could tip them and delay them and then start with late season varieties to start with, we might see a good Floricane crop on those. And we've seen in some of these varieties in a substrate situation, if they get planted late, they also have reduced flower initiation late in the season. So it might be that you could delay them from emergence in the spring and have the late varieties and tip them and have a very good Floricane for the next year without having to prune too much of that primicane crop off. We also saw in hot places like Morocco in the summer where there's a lot of sun and it can get warm, if they use shade cloth, it tends to make the plants stretch and they get taller. So that might be a way to actually get taller canes with less flowering to give yourself a very good Floricane for the following season. It's something I've thought about for a number of years, and I haven't had much chance to implement it or to try it, but it's something I've thought about, and it might be a way to, or something that you might want to try to convince Brent that he wants to try, just to see if some of these varieties with larger fruit that we can't see the fall production potential maybe gives you a better Floricane production potential. And those canes, then the tips are pruned off. And so you might get better hardiness in those canes because you're leaving the thickest, strongest part of the cane for the wintertime. Just something to think about, something I've had kind of mulled about over the years. That might be an interesting way to get an alternative Floricane production on some of these varieties that are marketed as primicane fruiting that are too late for some of our markets. And so here you can see how tall some of these plants can get, and the fruit is really up here on the top, and you don't see much fruit development down here in this part. So if you were to tip these and still leave, 6 feet of cane, you would have a very good Floricane that already be trained And that part of the cane is usually the thickest, most sturdy part of the cane. So it might give you a very nice Floricane crop. And you might use shade cloth then, you see down here, to make them a little bit taller even as they stretch towards the sun. Anyway, with that, a little bit of additional information. Cornell maintains a fruit web page. There's a berry section that is very good for the berry growers. There's also a tree fruit and a grape section that has a tremendous amount of information about production in our region of various crops. There's a production guide for the eastern and midwestern part of the United States that has a lot of information on production practices, fertilization, pest management, all sorts of things. And every year, Cornell puts out pest management guidelines for berry crops and the other fruit crops as well, with updated pesticide use and so on. Penn State maintains a high tunnel site, and there's a lot of other information. If you're interested in our varieties, you can, of course, contact me directly, or if you're a nursery and you want to license them, you can contact the Cornell Center for Technology Licensing, or contact me directly. Or if you happen to be a Canadian coming down to catch a Utah talk, which I've seen a lot of people going to meetings all over the country now with Zoom, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, but the Ontario berry growers work with us in Canada. And then I am going to spend just a minute or two to talk to you, just to show you pictures of what we're looking at. This is what an early season variety for us we're trying to bring into the market. We have this in commercial trials. And so we're trying to ripen stuff in late August, early September with large fruit that displays it well. So this is 1614 and it's in commercial trials, and 1725 also in commercial trials. We want to get fruit that's easy to pick out in the open, bright red, early and large. And so this is maybe a 5 to 6 gram fruit, and that's a very nice size fruit with that bright color, non-darkening. That's also something we're very interested in. And with that, I'll conclude.